Good day. Welcome to the Strong Ambition podcast. And today we're going to talk about powerlifting and injury prevention with my therapist, Dr. Goguen, also known as Dr. G. And I've been working with Dr. G for over 3 months now to help me work around my knee issue, yet still be able to perform for powerlifting. And Dr. G works specifically with powerlifting athletes to help them perform at their best, and not just any powerlifting athletes, really highly competitive, strong athletes. I tell you, if you think 400 or 500 pounds is heavy, that is not heavy for these athletes because they are highly competitive. And we're going to dive into the 3 lifts, the bench, squat, and deadlift, and tell you some things that you really need to pay attention to so you can do it better, plus be more injury resilient. Dr. G has a ton of knowledge, but she also has a great way to communicate because she's also a lifter herself. So she understands all of the things that go into lifting. And just as a quick sidebar, make sure you're following me on Instagram and keeping up with all of the latest stuff for the cookie cutter challenges. It's going really well. And at the end of the 60 days, which is just about 30 days from now, I'm about halfway through, there's going to be a big sale on my program that you're going to want to take advantage of. But let's dive into this episode. It's a fun one. It's great if you love lifting. But without further ado, here is Dr. Jim Goguen. Good day, Dr. G. How are you today?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. I actually got to call myself out on this. I did accidentally call you Jamie on one of my posts, and then I talked to you after. I was like, oh, it's Jem. And so for the listeners to know that she has a very specific French name. And so you're from Canada. Whereabouts in Canada are you from?
I'm actually from Ottawa.
Ottawa. Okay. And that can be a pretty French town itself, eh?
Yeah. Oh my God. Hearing you say A just makes me laugh right now because I can really pick it up in other people. I don't pick it up in myself as much, but like anytime I hear it, I'm like, that's it. That's what people are pointing out in us all the time.
Yeah. There's certain things. I was in Arizona the one year, and he's like, yeah, I can tell. And I'm like, really? And then I can't remember what the phrase was. It wasn't A, but there was something I said, and he's like, that's it right there. I'm like, okay, that's pretty Canadian. And like, I mean, I'm not sure if you ever heard of the TV show Letterkenny. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah, I have.
So you watch that, and it is poetically clever and witty on just, Canadian hockey boy language. Like they have the hockey guys, and then they have like the country guys, and it is its own language for sure. So it's probably nice for you to hear it once in a while because you're used to all the American accents a little bit more, right?
Yeah, it's so funny though, because I do believe that like hockey playing Canadians have their own lexicon on their own. And I forgot that you played hockey, and I was like, yeah, there it is. Like that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely its own lexicon. There's the spin-off from Letterkenny called, I think, Shoresy, and that's one of the characters, and it's literally just all hockey guys and just all their random trash talk. And again, I think the writers of that show were fucking poetic with how they made it so clever. It was awesome. But let's dive into this episode to get to know you better. I'm excited about this. So the listeners know that you are my current physio coach for my powerlifting. And why don't you just tell people more about you? Who are you? How'd you get into doing what you're doing now?
See, this is weird because when we met, I basically had to interview you, and now you have to interview me.
Yeah, that's fun.
I don't like being in the hot seat. That's a really loaded question. I don't really know the best way to answer it. I mean, I was an athlete myself. My background is in gymnastics. It's not in strength sports. And I pursued kinesiology and things kind of in that world just because I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if people can really be good at something they're not actually genuinely interested in. So I tried just kind of like pursuing academia in a realm that I could pay attention to and that I wanted to do for a long time. And this is where I ended up.
That's cool. I think that's really cool that you came from gymnastics and got into it's an interesting way to put it. Can you get good at something or be good at something you're not interested in? And I would argue people can start with interest and get good at something, but lose interest, right? And you see it a lot in hockey players when their parents push them really hard. It's like, yeah, I hate hockey. Like I've seen it all the time. And so to maintain your skill level in something, that's a whole different ball game. But yeah, so and just so the listeners understand, you're a board certified doctor. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I was originally board certified in Canada, and then also board certified in the U.S. And I've also worked in the Dominican Republic. So I've actually worked in 3 countries.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And so, what gravitated you towards the powerlifting kind of like sport? Like, did you get into it yourself and then start helping others?
Yeah, I would say like in my university, it was quite a small graduating class. Like there was like 180 of us. And there was a group of guys that were really into powerlifting. And I don't know if you know Patrick Vellner. He's obviously he has a very defined career in CrossFit. I think he's won CrossFit 3 times or something crazy, but he was also my graduating year. And we also had like an Olympic tennis player and like just all these really impressive athletes. And we had a really tiny gym, which like you would think like, oh, that blows. But then you're kind of like forced to train with these athletes that you wouldn't normally train with. And that was kind of how I started picking up like barbell training in general, was just while I was in school. And yeah, it kind of just went from there. But mostly, like admittedly, my internship, like residency style learning, where you specialize in your final year of school, was not in sports. It was in chronic pain management and clinical psychology. So understanding like how we think about pain, how we interpret pain, and how to communicate with patients in a way that sets them up for success. And so I didn't actually get involved in strength sports until I had a private practice and realized that the current model of how we were dealing with patients was not conducive to actually having athletes permanently change the way that they are moving to prevent these things from happening in the first place. And, I think you and I kind of experienced this with your issue. It's like, I can give you a million exercises for your knee, but if we don't change your squat pattern to get you out of your quads, your knees are always going to be taking the brunt of the load in everything that you do in a squat pattern. So I felt like the traditional, clinic approach of fixing people was like so narrowed in on that one specific spot that they had pain, just treating the one spot that they had pain, and then sending them off to go and do the things that got them in pain in the first place. And I was like, yeah, this doesn't work. Like these people don't get better and nobody knows how to help them because you don't learn strength sports in school, right? That's not like, you don't have like a month or something where you go through like how to effectively barbell train. Like it's, your guess is as good as mine. You learn by teaching and you learn by being involved in that community and learning over a long period of time. So that's kind of why I started my online model, because I actually felt that without, being guided by palpation, which we are really strong in like that guiding our decisions, I wanted to completely take that away and learn how to analyze people and how they move and effectively help them move better so that they don't need me, which is kind of like what you and I are doing together. But in so doing, sometimes seeing people in person prevents that from happening because we get so narrowed in on treating the one, like ouchie that they have, instead of looking at like the greater scheme of like, we talk about it like, how is fatigue management? What other sports are you involved in? And, what does your squat pattern actually look like? And I would say most people in my field don't know how to effectively analyze those patterns. So that's kind of like where the hole is in that whole healthcare system.
That's a huge, huge point, that there's a hole there. Like there's a big gap in the system. And I'd seen this recently, that the research for, sports injuries, like going to physical therapists, is terrible. Like the difference between going for one session or 4 or 5 is the same. It's like the body actually mostly can heal itself. And it doesn't mean that you don't need help. It means that the model has to have a problem with it. And one of my biggest things I noticed from turning into online coaching myself was, I'm helping the client do it themselves and do things routinely themselves and more lifestyle. And as being an in-person coach, yes, you're there for immediate feedback, But for long-term sustainability, like teaching you a skill is one thing, but you sustaining a skill is what the practice requires in life. And I started to realize, like, why don't physios do this? Why aren't, therapists the ones giving the at-home workouts? And I would typically get like a sheet of paper, some links to some videos, but no upkeep. And so your model of having, hey, send me this video, okay, in great detail, every single video I send you, whether it's good or just a little constructive feedback, that is like real time, because this is what I'm doing on my own, and I have to rely on me doing it on my own in the future. And to be able to have someone say, no, like, this is what we got to focus on, and picking apart all these little things, even in the corrective exercise. And as you mentioned, the other major thing was, you're the first therapist I've worked with that said, what is the movement pattern doing that we can alter? Because it is so joint and injury specific. I mean, for my very first one, all the guy did for, I think it was, I want to say over 2 months, and I had this low back issue. It's kind of, my QL was tight, and, he associated with the glute. And so all he would do is loosen the glute, and he would yank my leg out. He would loosen the glute, and he would yank my leg out. And he's like, yeah, no, it looks more even. And that's all he was trying to do. As long as you even it up that day. Yeah. Kept going back to it. And I'm like, this is stupid. Why am I going back to this guy every day if all he's doing is he's loosening my glute and pulling my leg, literally pulling my leg? And so then I started to see this in different models. Like, am I getting long-term corrective changes from my therapist? And like, from our experience together, like, my squat pattern's different, and I walk different now because, hey, I wasn't straightening my hamstrings, and it was something that didn't dawn on me. It was like just standing. I was like, wait, I never lock out my legs. And it would make sense why I would get this consistent knee pain. So I think that's really awesome that you're basically recreating a new model. You're creating something that creates this long-term sustainability for people. I'm curious, what else did you really learn? Because I thought that was so interesting that there was a clinical psychology pain management. What else did you really learn from that form of education? Because I think there's something really valuable for people to appreciate when it has to do with pain management in general.
Well, what I will say to what you said, you are a perfect example of people who kind of fell through the cracks with all the, you've put so much effort into healing, and you're like, I've seen all these people and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like, you are like the perfect example of like an athlete that falls through the cracks because we just don't have the right systems in place. But yes, aside from that, the chronic pain management, I think the biggest thing that I can take away from that is that there's nociceptive pain, which is, okay, you like fell, you hurt your knee, right? You had physical damage. But pain is not just your body being physically injured. Pain is the emotional appraisal of that situation. Right? And you could see it in like a lot of things. Like, if somebody makes the sound of a blowtorch and they put an ice cube on the back of your neck, you will feel burned, right? You will actually feel burned because your emotional appraisal of what happened to you indicated to you that something serious happened. And we see this all the time with doctors, the way that they communicate with patients, and it's called the nocebo effect, which is essentially you implement and you create negative outcomes in your patients based on the way that you speak with them. So in America, it's really interesting, and I've really struggled being here because it really makes me sad how people are treated like wallets. They're just wallets, right? We have insurance companies that pay for surgeries, and it's almost like everything is elective. So if you went in to see a surgeon, you said, hey, I had knee pain, or you went in to see a physician, the first thing that they would do is recommend the most invasive procedure, surgery. But what does that do to the patient? What did that tell the patient, being like, oh, it's so bad that like they have to operate on me? Like, this is a big deal. That in and of itself creates a worse outcome for that patient than if that person never got help at all.
Yeah, that's huge. That it's
It's the response, just how you talk to them about their issues.
and it's so big what you mentioned about it being a wallet and the whole money system being different there. I mean, you can usually, I would argue, the quality of care can be great, and you don't always get the best quality here, but that's a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem. And I love that you pointed out that little model of the ice cube and the blowtorch. And I've heard that if you tell people, you put their hands on a pipe, and you tell them it's going to be really hot water and it's ice cold water, they'll freak out because they think it's searing their hands and it's just really cold. So you just convince people of these things. And the way you said, it's the emotion that you attach to the thing. And so I think that's fascinating that you're already seeing it. Like, so many people can be identified by their pain. And I think that's a huge problem. It's like, you know, I'm a hurt person. There's like, rather than you have a problem that you need to solve. And I see that being a huge problem with chronic issues. I'm curious, what really pushed you, or what's it like? Because powerlifting is such an intense sport, known to be hard on the joints, being specific for powerlifters. And have you worked with other athletes, and what do you see different?
Oh, for sure. I would say, you know, it's interesting how it kind of came full circle because, you know, that's my background is dealing with that psychological component and like learning how to give patients the best outcome just by like being present with them and actually giving a shit. But with powerlifters, I mean, this is a very interesting community of people because there's a lot of, I don't want to say conclusions that we can draw, but there's a lot of associations that bring up questions with powerlifting. And those relate to the use of steroids, misuse or use, and then also the overlay of like complex emotional disorders. For example, bipolar disorder, very, very common in men who use anabolic steroids. Do those people seek anabolic steroids because they feel like they need to balance what they're feeling, or do those anabolic steroids precipitate symptoms of bipolar disorder? I don't know if we can effectively answer that question, but there is a very large psychological component to powerlifting, not only in just in being an athlete and having to be headstrong to put 1,000 pounds on your back, but I do believe that that community that I've worked with out of any sport I've worked with, I feel like really needs a lot of support with emotional issues. And I don't know if that's, you know, steroids cause that, or again, like I said, sometimes people seek that because they want to feel more balanced and they think steroids is going to make them feel more balanced. But there's a lot of emotional overlay, whether it's, you know, you're trying to prove to yourself that you can do it or that you're worth it, or you think that, you know, your business will only be successful if you can achieve a certain number, right? But what we see in powerlifters is that that benchmark never stops changing. You know, it'll be like, I have to hit 2K. And then every guy who hits 2K does not hang their hat up. They're like, it's got to be the next one. It's got to be 22. Then it's got to be 23. And that never really ends. So with injuries, especially, you know, telling a guy at that level of competition, you know, that maybe we need to take a step back and do things a little bit differently for a while. It's really hard to let go of what you think is going to help because you feel this innate pressure to perform.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered the emotional tear that can happen to a person when they're using anabolics as well. It's kind of its own form. Like bodybuilding has it quite commonly, right? Anabolics and that they would then deal with muscle dysmorphia. But now you got basically PR dysmorphia that
literally.
no matter what, you're going to be too weak of a guy in the gym, right? And so no matter what, you're always chasing the dragon. You're always chasing, and I think this is something that is really difficult in the world of excellence, that if you can settle in to be happy pursuing things, and that's what my whole mantra of my podcast is, it's like, it's not the pursuit of happiness, it's the happiness of pursuit. But if people are always thinking that the happiness is at that number, at that physique or anything like that, that's literally setting you up for emotional turmoil, because you can achieve it. Like it has an end goal, right? And for the consequence of the anabolics, and not to mention the intensity that powerlifting is, right? It's not like I mean,
Yeah.
for sure that, you know, bodybuilding is very intense, it's very wearing and tearing, and they're tough workouts. But I mean, one of the major things I remember hearing, I think it was Stu McGill talk about with Ed Cohen, is the neural drive effect that Ed Cohen would have. And so for people to understand that, that's really like, that is a mother lifting a car to save her child. And it's like how dark of a place you can go in order to put everything into everything. And that's, you know, with smelling salts and all that stuff. And if that's your sport, that's like your, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing you do. It's not just this occasional emergency situation. Plus, you're trying to always achieve more. Plus, you're playing with anabolics. The emotional wear and tear is going to be real. So I can see that being very, very challenging. And I think that's so cool that I just wouldn't have expected you to go that angle. I was expecting to hear about joints and all that stuff, but you're like, no, like the emotions, and again, the emotion's going to affect even the pain. So I'm curious then, from that perspective, did they ignore pain too much? Do you see that?
Oh, I see it in all different ways. And I think that, like, you know, what we're discussing here, it can either benefit or kind of impede somebody from being successful in powerlifting. You know, there's definitely people who put the pressure on themselves and they're so mentally tough that they can make it happen no matter what. Right. And then there's people who put all the pressure on themselves and then they just keep feeling like they fall short. And then, you know, whatever, like their emotions get the best of them and then it ends up negatively affecting them. Like, I see it in both ways, but I definitely get a lot of athletes. Like, I would say, it sounds sad, but it's like I'm like the last resort. Like, they come to me when they're like, I'm held together by a shoestring right now. Like, you got to figure this out. And I'm like, I'm flexible with it. Like, whatever the goal is of that athlete, I will do everything I can. And, you know, sometimes people call me up 2 weeks out of a meet prep and they're like, hey, I just tore my quad, but I need to squat 800 pounds in 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, well, let me lay out the risks for you. And if you're okay with that, I'll do everything I can. But, you know, those are a lot of the situations I get. And then a lot of times people hire me on their off seasons because they're like, I don't want to end up like how my husband ended up. He exploded both of his knees, bilateral patellar tendon rupture, you know, had fractures in his legs, avulsion fractures from his adductors, had to relearn how to walk over the last 6 months. You could also end up in that kind of situation. So a lot of people hire me on off season so they don't end up like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, the reality of the sport, that you're talking about life or death weight. There's certain weights that you go on your back, like, so some of the listeners might not appreciate when you're saying the 2K, it's 2,000 pounds that you're talking about. Like, they're talking about scary monster weight, and that can be the consequence to this game, you know? And I do wonder too, because there's so many different approaches that I've seen from powerlifting. You talk to different powerlifters and some people will say, you got to go 100% in the gym every day. And then other people are like, no, you want to go the right intensity at the right time, reserving reps to failure, you know, and it's just, there's different personalities in the gym for how you get to that 2K or whatever your goal is, you know. It can definitely change the probability of that hurting you or not, right? And I think that's an important part, right? Because, like, when you're talking, like, you can get strong pretty fast, but then what's your point where your body breaks? And, you know, one of the things I love from Stan Efferding, and he says, if you want to be healthy, you don't compete. And it makes sense, because the best athletes in the world just simply push as hard as everyone else and don't get hurt. Like, it's the people who don't get hurt that have the most talent and push the hardest, do the best, but they don't get hurt. So they're able to do more reps. And the people who try to push hard and they have talent but get hurt, they can't be as good, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a diminishing return to, like, that mindset of having to give 110%. And what we see in powerlifters is that there's an inflection point in especially males where they get to a certain size and they get to a certain strength level that it actually starts to negatively affect their recovery enough that they do end up, one of my clients. But so with those types of athletes, especially ones that have injury history already, and they're, starting to level up in like the 800 plus deadlift world, they usually run undulation cycles. Like they will not be pulling heavy every week. It'll be max effort and speed work, and you'll really cycle through that every other week to keep them healthy, because you will reach a point where no, you cannot consistently be pulling in the 800s every week and not feel like shit.
Yeah, that was something I learned a lot from uh, what's his name now? I'm forgetting it. West Side Barbell, Louis Simmons. And it was like 8-week cycle or 8-day cycles, like asynchronous. And he would do the same thing where it was like, you don't do it within a 7-day cycle. And I remember Charles Poliquin would say it takes 10 days for the CNS to actually recover. And if you're getting to those upper, what people don't appreciate is when you're a real expert lifter, because the spectrum of lifting is actually ridiculous. It's like a novice is really quick, and then like 95% of the population that's training is an intermediate. Like the intermediate bundle is like very vast. There should be more categories, but there isn't. But experts, like experienced lifters, it requires a lot. Like you mentioned, you're at that limitation you're pushing super physiological weight. You now want to be superhuman. It's that simple. So you can't, adapt the same. I'm curious from your perspective, because, coming from seeing injuries and stuff like that, but you also know the sport very well. One of the coolest things of working with you, even before, I started working with my powerlifting coach, is like you helped my squat, like you changed my squat. So I'm curious from your perspective, even for like a recreational powerlifter, people who want to get strong, but, need to understand certain things about the lifts. What are some problems that you see people commonly make? And we can kind of break down the 3 big ones. What's the most common one that you see with like the bench press?
With the bench press, flaring of the elbows. Because people they want to use their pecs and their rotator cuff. Those are not big enough muscles to move hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It's just not. So there's an anatomical failure point that you're going to hit before you hit the number on the bar that you want to see. So understanding how to utilize your back and your leg drive and actually keeping your elbows tucked in to protect your shoulders, that's the biggest one. Anytime someone's like, yeah, I have anterior shoulder pain in the bench and I'm a newer lifter and I don't have a coach, I'm like, you are flaring your elbows. I can guarantee it.
Yes, absolutely. I see a lot of that. And probably one of my favorite tips on that is, you're not that strong, don't go to failure. Like if you're going to failure on the bench press, it's just like, if you're going to fail on the bench press, you are failing to do the bench, which means you're not doing good form. As we just mentioned, you're going to flare the elbows, you're going to do all bad form. And this goes for sure. The thing about the deadlift, if it's evident, you can't do it. Yes, you could possibly hurt yourself, but it's evident. The squat, at least guys catch themselves, and people tend to be a little bit more cautious. They won't go as low. They can still fuck it up. But the bench press, guys especially are so arrogant and like, oh yeah, I got to do another one. And I had this one guy beside me one day where he got me to spot him, failed. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to do another rep in 5 minutes. No, you won't. Like you failed to do it. Your body's incapable. Nothing changes in 5 minutes. And so I wish more people knew that. I'm also curious, some shoulder health tips on that, because you mentioned improve the form, you'll improve the shoulder a lot. But what are some fundamental things? Because, you see the good old external rotator stuff. But what are some kind of maybe myths, but better advice for people to take better care of their shoulders so they have a strong bench?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say my new kind of pivot in how I like to present material and education is everything that I present is more movement specific. So if we want to talk specifically about the bench press and how to effectively, prepare for the bench press, then that's, a different conversation. And it's funny because when I work with athletes on their bench issues, they're like, why don't I warm up my chest? Like, why am I not warming up my chest and my rotator cuff muscles? I'm like, those are not the muscles that are supposed to be guiding the majority of your bench press. So most of my athletes warm up with upper back exercises. And when people think shoulders, they always think the glenohumeral joint, right? The ball and socket joint that is moved by your little rotator cuff muscles. But they don't think about the fact that the shoulder joint is comprised of three joints, which is glenohumeral, scapulothoracic, and then also costovertebral, because our rib cage is a really big part of how the shoulder moves. So if you're not able to mobilize your rib cage in extension, and you're not able to mobilize your scaps in depression and retraction, you're going to have shoulder problems in the bench press. So those are kind of like the main things I get people to focus on, which would not be most people's first thought when they think shoulder.
Right. Yeah. It's super common for novices, people to underestimate just like how the stability is the key, right? It's the fact that when you watch people who are novices in the bench press, the feet are flying everywhere. And, you know, like as soon as I see a guy kick his leg out or anything,
yeah, we're done.
yeah, it's just like, no, like this is not helping you. This is hurting you, you know?
Yeah, their
And
hands are loose on the bar. That's like my biggest pet peeve, because I'm like, I don't think people realize how much intrinsic tension you have to create to be an effective bencher.
yeah, yeah, that's I'm forgetting the term for that. What's the term for that? The harder you grip, and then
Irradiation.
radiation. Yes. Yeah, I heard a really good like description. It's like, you know, grip the bar like you're trying to punch the ceiling, like try to be intentful that. And
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the best pieces of advice I even got before I worked with my coach Curtis, is he said, you want a tight setup, like create everything tight as possible. And it just makes such a difference. In his recent tips, it makes a big impact on that. How to set the shoulders, how to set your legs, get that leg drive and lock it in. I think it makes sense. I think like in his warm up is literally all upper back. That's all we do. It's super simple. And then, as you mentioned too, is like it's also the movement, right? And one of the biggest shifts for me from, you know, when I was doing my own programming is like I have 6 to 8 warm-up sets of just like few reps of just prime the movement. So continue, because this is the sport. This isn't just a workout now. This is you doing the movement pattern. It's like a hockey player taking, you know, shots with the puck. You got to warm it up. And so that actually makes a huge impact of practicing the movement. Let's shift into the squat. What would you say more people need to pay attention to in the squat? You've changed mine quite a bit.
Yeah, yours is unique because you actually didn't have the number one problem I see in every single new squatter, which is everybody sticks their butt out.
Yeah.
Everybody arches their low back and they lose all of their brace, which, I mean, novice lifters are learning what a brace is, and that is a hard quest, but that is the easiest way to lose it.
Well, I think that came from the knees over toes fear that was, you know, a huge legend.
What started that?
Well, so I have a bit of a theory on it. And what's funny is like how much it cultivated the culture. Like it just, I believed it. Like I was taught it and everything. I remember
my boomer high school gym teacher taught us that, right? Like who started this rumor? I need to know.
Even my one of my colleagues, she was a strength conditioning coach going back for physio, and her physio professor, she was saying you can't put the knee over the toe. It's like, I work with curlers. They have to put their knee over their toe. I'm not going to train them to not put their knee over their toe. This is literally a physical therapist in post-secondary education. Like that's terrible education. My theory is when you look at a novice squatter, like brand new, they want to lift their heels, right? And so because they want to lift their heels, I think it started as a fundamental cue to make people know how to use their butt better, because we don't intuitively know how to drop our hips back. And so my belief was the knee over toes is so that people don't feel the need to bend their knees and to raise their heels or keep their heels down, but keeping the heels down, dropping your hips back. But then we use that so excessively that we forgot to say, well, you can go a little bit over your toes. I think it was just a basic kind of, that's my theory, that it was a basic fundamental tool that you would use. You would put someone in front of a wall, go for a squat. Just because you're trying to get them to use their butt more. Now it just, the pendulum swung to, it's all hips, no
Yeah.
knees. And so now the knees are just, everyone's terrified of bending their knees. So no, I totally see that. And people don't appreciate what that's doing to the arch, to their brace. They literally have like an open can system, like they're not braced, right? And so
Yeah.
that would be why people would have back issues on the squat. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think we were kind of, discussing it with the bench press is like powerlifting. The entire objective of powerlifting is like, can you hit a competition level of depth on all of those movements or range of motion, all those movements without anything else moving that doesn't absolutely have to move for the lift to be a good lift, right? You want to be as tight and compact and move as little as possible, just move enough to get you the lift. So with the squat, if you're leaking energy and you're changing your lumbar position and you're all over the place throughout the movement of the lift, you're just leaking energy all over the place.
Yeah, the energy leaks is a big thing. It's
Yeah.
just like you got to see it like that. You're trying to be as efficient as possible to do the heaviest thing possible. So veering off the path in any way, using the wrong muscle at the wrong time in any way, that's going to be a problem. And that's again why these are skills, right? When you want to get really heavy, it's a skill. And if you don't have that brace on the front, like it's all in your spine because you're not pushing. The way I always try to explain to people is like, if you have enough of a brace in the stomach, is that you actually are almost pushing into your rib cage upwards a little bit. That's kind of the way I felt. Like the rib cage is pushing up from the front. If you're not pushing up from the stomach in the front, then it's all on the back and it's all on the spine. And then your back's eventually going to get hurt. That only makes sense. It's what the body has to do to compensate for the lack of strength in the front. And I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people miss. And again, I could see people going too heavy, not finding the appropriate depth. And if you basically, I'd say if you're squatting with a barbell on your back and you want to go heavy, you have to fucking know how to brace.
Yeah, you really do, or it's not going to go well.
And I think people, now that I use a belt, I think people should use belts, but you should not use a belt until you know how to brace, because so many people, I see people do it when they're doing a lat pull down. It's just like, what is it for? Like you're just feeling.
It's just decoration at that point.
It is, yeah.
We've talked about this quite a bit because like you're a very effective squatter without the equipment, and the equipment can really take you from like level 9 to level 10. But when you're new and you don't know how to brace yet, if you just use a belt in place of learning how to intrinsically create a brace, then you're also going to get hurt because you can, the belt might work 100 times, but maybe not 101 times. And you don't know when that time is going to be. So you just got to learn how to brace properly.
Yeah. So try to explain to people best you can, how should people brace and how does the belt actually help them? Because I think that's a misconception.
Yeah. So I actually have a free bracing protocol. It's on my link in bio on Instagram. But this is one of the most common issues that I was getting with newer powerlifters. And I was like, you know what? This is something that I see like 1,000 times a week. I may as well just make a protocol to teach people what is it supposed to feel like. And then, they can work with their coaches on how to integrate that sensation into the lifts. But basically, knowing the anatomy of the diaphragm is really important, because if you don't even know the muscle responsible for that movement, you don't know where it sits in your body, you're not going to understand where you're pulling air into. And you can really see it in people who breathe into their chest all the time. You'll see squatters holding the bar on their back and they go and they go to squat. But it's like, okay, so you arched your back, you lost all the tension we just built on that unrack, and then you pulled all of your air into your chest. But what you're trying to stabilize is your core, which is, at the lower edge of your rib cage. So learning the anatomy of the diaphragm is super important. Learning where to pull breath is super important. And then also learning how to use that breath against a belt. And I have a lot of issues with athletes who wear super, super tight belts because that's not what they're for. If it's tight enough that I can see your stomach protruding over it extensively when you breathe in, it's definitely too tight. But you want it just tight enough that when you push air into the right spot, you get that physical feedback of, oh, there's something here to push against. So you should be able to stick like 2 fingers into your belt. And then, people mess this up in all sorts of ways, but Sometimes people pull their air above the belt, then they arch their low back. Sometimes people pull their air below the belt, and then they end up with urinary incontinence issues. So it is a very complicated technique to kind of like describe verbally,
Fair.
but it has to do with maintaining the amount of pressure that you're holding in your abdomen, using your breath to create that pressure, and that creating that outward pressure on the muscles of your core so that your core is as stiff as possible.
Yeah, I like that. The outward pressure. I think that's what I really learned well was I heard a good coach say it's like 360 degrees of breath going your stomach all the way around. And if you imagine that it has to even be on the sides and everything, that's a heavy brace. And you're right, you need some visual aids on that. But I think that was a good description.
And one of the techniques that I have in my free bracing manual is it's called 360 banded breathing. You take a TheraBand, you wrap it around your stomach, and you just practice breathing out into it. And at first you might only feel it forward, and then you could go, okay, now I'm trying to feel it in the sides, and then trying to feel it in the back. But with practice at rest, you can learn how to pull that 360 degrees. And then what you can do is integrate that sensation into active movements that you're doing. Because it's easier to learn it when you're just like laying down and you're actively just, trying to draw all your attention to that one thing. And, for newer lifters, I think the biggest, complaint is that they feel like they're juggling a million different cues at the same time. Because it's like, okay, I have to brace, and then I also have to keep my upper back tight, and then I have to keep midfoot pressure, and I have to pack my chin, and I have to do, I'm sure you know what it's like.
Oh yes, that's my squat. That's 100% my squat for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, it is a lot, and so I think taking like time to prime your brace prior to actually doing your lifts as part of your warm up. I get a lot of my athletes to do diaphragmatic breathing techniques before the warm-up. I think right now you're doing the 90-90 drill. That just helps you neurologically connect to that part of your body, because it's not something that, it's not like all day you walk around and go, oh, I have to descend my diaphragm to take my breath now. That's just a total autonomic thing. So you have to bring it into, a conscious effort if you want to be bracing properly.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. And we had done it so many times that, like you say, it's a neurological thing of like valuing how deep the breath can go into the diaphragm. I think it's an effective tool. Let's switch into the deadlift. And what are some things that you think people really need to pay attention to in that?
I would say the biggest thing with the deadlift is that people don't know how to get into their quads.
That's fair.
And this is why you're so good at deadlifting, because you are quad city, right? So for most athletes, they're so posterior chain dominant in the deadlift. Whether it's conventional, that one obviously why it's posterior chain. But even in the sumo, if you're not pulling your hips close to the bar and you're not popping the bar off the floor with your quads, you're just doing a lot of low back reps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a big shift. I mean, you mentioned I'm quad dominant, so it came a bit more natural to me. I did work with another powerlifting coach a couple of years ago, and she had me do like depth sumo squats, and it made a big difference. She showed me a leg drive a little bit more. But I think, like you say, it's just this dominance that I have in my body that made it make more sense for me. And now it's even better with some of the tips I got from Curtis. But he had mentioned something that was really eye-opening to me was, even on the conventional, and both of them, is like you tighten up the upper body and you push your legs. It's not like, it is funny as it sounds. It's like I was so concerned about getting the hip extension while doing the leg strengthening, or even doing hip extension simultaneously. And I was always convinced that that's what it was supposed to be. But he's like, no, you maintain your hip position, straighten your legs, and then finish your extension at the top of a lift. Does that kind of make sense? Like
like he gets you to like lock your knees first.
Yes. And it's like, and just in terms of being able to feel the quads more, it's like, make sure that your upper body is super tight and then push the legs. Like,
and that cue is really anatomy specific though, because if you had long femurs, if you did that, like me, I have long femurs. If I lock out my legs first, I will be stuck in a hinge. That deadlift will never come up.
Right.
But if you have shorter femurs, Exactly. And that, that specificity is why coaching is so important, because the advice will never be the same for anybody, right? It's
Right.
going to completely differ based on your body.
Well, and especially for deadlifts, right? Because sumos and conventionals are so different. But I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
Highly debated topic.
Mhm.
Is sumo cheating?
No, it's not cheating. I would say that sumo is one of the most technical lifts in powerlifting.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it is very, very highly technical. Conventional is not technical at all. Anybody can muscle fuck a deadlift in conventional. It might not feel good, but you can lift a lot of weight doing that. But I think the issue with sumo, obviously, there are people with the advantages of having leverages that make them very good at sumo. So it seems like cheating. It's like, okay, well, having long arms is cheating, but they're not going to be a bench specialist.
Right.
Like we all just have parts of our body that's going to make us more effective. But I would say, like, I blew out my back a year ago, like so bad that I could not sit down for 5 months. Like, I
Wow.
could not sit in a car. I couldn't sit down to eat a meal. Like, I was fucked up. And I've been a conventional puller. The first time I ever peaked my conventional before I was powerlifting at all, I pulled 300 pounds. Because,
Wow.
like I said, you can muscle fuck a lot. And, like, I'm like a 130-pound chick. Like, I'm nothing crazy. But then I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to not train while my back's completely fucked. So what am I going to do? And I was like, oh, you know what? I'll give sumo a try. It like doesn't match my body. It doesn't feel natural at all, but I can hinge like that without any pain. So it's something that's progressible. So I was like, okay, whatever. It took me a year to really feel like that technique was like a greased wheel. And all sumo lifters will say, like, there will be days where it's just not clicking. Like, some days it just doesn't quite click.
Yeah, I've definitely had that for sure. I sometimes usually due to sleeper training, but I know what you mean. And I mean with deadlifting and powerlifting in general, but deadlifting is like, I want to say it's like almost immediate. It's because in a squat you're finding your groove as you descend. The bench press you're finding it. You have
Yeah.
to find it right away when you're doing the deadlift. It's like all the fucking tension is in there, and to find that groove immediately, it's like you say, it's super technical. What I understood about the sumo too was about how your hip position, basically your genetic kind of your hip positioning. Some people have leverages in the way that their hips are set up, basically making a wider stance easier. Versus if you have narrower hips, you're much more of that kind of like upside down triangle shaped. Like that's going to be conventional. You're just good at forcing upwards. And it's funny because this is a really good comparison I heard. Is like if sumo was cheating, then everyone that's the best power lifter should be sumo, right? By the standard, it's like it should definitely be cheating, and everyone should do it, and then everyone who's the best should be doing it. But it's not. It's dependent on the person. I think the argument that I do appreciate, because one of my good powerlifting buddies, it's like I understand why it doesn't look like the same and it doesn't seem like the same feat, because the distance is shorter, right? You're using leverages to make it shorter, but it's a sport, right? And if the sport was the conventional deadlift, it'd be different, but it's just the deadlift. So it's kind of open to essentially the subjective perception there.
That's like bench press. It's like, I'm not going to not show off my gymnastics arch if I can make myself cheat more. Like, if given that option, I'm going to take it, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to bench 185 with a flat back. But if I have the thoracic mobility, because I was a gymnast for 15 years, absolutely I'm going to cheat as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. The arch, wider grip. Some people have like 2 inches of depth on some of their bench presses. It's a bench press, technically.
That's sick. I would do it if I could.
Yeah. And again, it's just like any sport has leverages and anatomy that is an advantage or disadvantage. It's just, conventional deadlifters want to complain about it. But if you're strong, you're strong, right? But let's I'd love to wrap this up knowing more about your powerlifting. Just,
Okay.
where's your powerlifting at now and where you're hoping to take it?
Well, so obviously with that injury, which ironically happened 2 months after I dislocated a shoulder. Um, so I had been like nurturing these injuries. I actually competed with a dislocated shoulder. It
Wow.
was really not fun, but I'm super flexible. So those are kind of like my issues in powerlifting, is like developing that stability and that tension. And, I was hoping to compete maybe at the end of last year, but as I mentioned, my husband exploded his knees and effectively ended his powerlifting career as well.
Um,
So, I mean, the focus was really just to get him healthy with rehab and get him walking again, and then maybe reconvene on like being able to focus on my career. But I'd say things are trending really well in the right direction. I mean, I have very minimal pain now. I can conventional so much more than I can sumo now that I've learned how to use my quads, but I still can't consistently pull with my knees together just with my back. So it's like, it's all manageable. It's all stuff that we can work through, and I'm still able to like effectively progress in powerlifting. It just like, like any athlete with an injury history, it just looks different. But I am really hoping that this year I can get back into an actual competition. With the insanely terrible year we had last year, I think there's room for some redemption. And we have a local gym here that does a unsanctioned push-pull meet in May. So I think my husband and I are going to do that one. I was hoping to beat him in deadlifts, but he's already pulled like 600 pounds since he flew his knees out.
wow. That's
Yeah, like
incredible.
stiff leg, like totally ridiculous. He was like, he's very built similarly to you, which is like shorter femurs, very quad dominant. He was an amazing sumo deadlifter, amazing squatter. So I was like, oh, like I got this. I'm gonna beat him, no problem. But yeah, he just like stiff leg 600 off the floor like nothing. So whatever. I guess the competition's over. But his goal is to bench 500. My goal is to bench probably 200. So we'll see.
That's awesome. How many
Yeah.
competitions have you actually had yourself?
Only one. I mean, like, so many of these had to get deferred. Where, like, I mean, with my back issue, like, I was like, I'm not messing with this. I literally can't sit down
Okay.
without my leg being on fire. And that lasted 5 months alone. And then his knees exploding at his meet. So I've just had to, like, consistently cancel meets because, like, life happens.
Yeah.
And that sucks. I don't know if that just means I'm getting old, or if it just means that like our lives are trending in the direction of the career part of powerlifting versus like the athlete part of powerlifting, which
Right.
I mean, I guess is bound to happen at some point.
And for people to understand, powerlifting takes a lot of fucking time. It's like even
Yeah.
just getting into this with Curtis, like I thought I was writing long workouts, and it's because of the practice of the reps. Like, and then you got injury prevention and rehab, and then you got accessories. I did bodybuilding, and I thought those were long workouts. And I think bodybuilding goes into like the lifestyle and the cardio if you have to add that in. But no, these are
Yeah.
fucking long, and again, it's a sport, right? But it's a sport that
Yeah.
requires a lot of time, and so I mean, that's why I'm hoping to. I'm not saying I'm going to hang it up and not do any meets after this year, but I'm hoping to get in a couple this year. And then
Yeah.
after that, I know I want to focus on career because I don't have that fucking time all the time. I can,
Yeah.
it's like if I can do it this
That's
spring
so
and
true.
get some experience, and then maybe in the future if I can cut out time. But no, it's tough. It's tough to have sports when you got life. But I'm curious from your perception because we've made some headway on my knee. I was curious what
Mhm.
your evaluation of what you think is going on at this point, kind of where it's been and stuff like that. Where do you project it's going to go?
With your knee?
Yeah.
So I think the one thing with you is you um you gravitate to old familiarity,
hmm
right? Like when there's days where you're like, I got to get in, I got to get this done. I'm like, oh, that's the squat that you sent me 3 months ago. Like, what's going on? Which is why I was forcing you to do tempo for so long, because I was like, I want us to really spend the time to think about it. But with you, it's like I think fatigue management is a big part of your recovery. I think learning how to use other muscle groups that aren't your quads is the biggest part of it. And I think as long as we can continue to improve on your squat technique, and also you don't even use sleeves yet.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
finally
know
ordered
how
them.
much
I
of
ordered
a
them.
rocket you're gonna feel like when you get sleeves on? You're gonna be like, this is so stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Another good quote from Curtis there. He said, when you're cleaning your car because it's snowed out and it's really snowy and it's cold out, well, you can do it without gloves. But if you wear gloves, it's way fucking easier. That's
Yeah.
lifting gear. That's what lifting gear is like. And
Yes.
I just never let go of that. I'm like, yeah, I fucking hate not wearing gloves. So I ordered it. I got a new belt on the way, new sleeves on the way.
Wait, you
And
ordered sleeves? Which ones did you order? Did you get the what did I say for you? The Pioneer?
I actually ended up getting, because they had a good deal on, I got SBD sleeves,
Okay.
and they got a good belt as well. So they
Yeah.
had a decent deal and it was a pretty good price. So,
The SUVs are a little softer, which I
okay.
think are good for you because we need to also be like conscious of like how much we're beating up the knee. Whereas like the Inzer Ergo Pros or like any of the stiff sleeves, you can just kind of band-aid whatever shit you have going on, but like that's going to cause damage the same way doing wraps causes damage. So the soft sleeves is a really good option for you. You probably won't get the same effect of like getting like 60 additional pounds into your squat, but you'll probably get like 20 to 30, and you'll probably feel a lot more confident.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. It's just feeling confident in the bottom. I think
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Well, let's leave it off with let people know where they can find more about you.
Yeah, so I guess the only social media I really use is Instagram, Dr. Jem Goguen. I have a bunch of, I post educational content every single day for lifters, for injuries, for technique, all that kind of stuff. And I also have that free bracing protocol if you guys want to check it out.
That's terrific. Well, thank you so much, Jem, for being on here today. I really appreciate it. And I will send you some videos probably tomorrow. I got squats tomorrow.
Okay, sick. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Thanks to Dr. G for that great conversation. That hour flew by. I could have chatted with her for a while about powerlifting. She's very knowledgeable and, as I mentioned, a great communicator. And to me, she just speaks more to the level of the athlete, but yet still very well articulated and appreciates all the nuance that goes into this stuff. Even when I had suggested some for my coach, she also pointed out other things that a coach needs to have a perception of when there's individuality. And I thought probably one of the coolest points that she brought up was the emotional attachment to pain. It's a really big thing that I think really gets overlooked, because anyone can have like pain, as you mentioned, nororeceptors, which is just your body will send you a signal of pain, but how you emotionally reflect on pain is totally different. And we both agreed, you got these powerlifters that just want to push, push, push. They got to get that PR. And so you have a context too, to better explain the 2K. This has to do with your total. Is if you're a powerlifting athlete and you want to have a competitive number, it's the total of your bench, squat, and deadlift. So an example, the 1,500-pound club, which I hope to one day accomplish. Not sure if I will, but and I want to say this is an intermediate goal. Experience goal is a 2K. But if I had, say, 400-pound bench press and a 500-pound squat and a 600-pound deadlift, that would total to 1,500 pounds. And that's a really good accomplishment for, an intermediate / experienced lifter. But experienced lifters, the elite, the advanced, they want to get that 2K. They want to get higher than that. And that's where she was talking about 800 pounds for a squat or a deadlift. This is superhuman weights. These are crazy things these people are attempting, and they're so dedicated to their craft. So you can imagine if you feel a hankling of pain or whatever, it's like, it's a lot of no pain, no gain in that category, right? But at the same time, you want your body to be able to perform. You want your body to not have any leaks in the chain. And so when you're thinking for yourself, if you're recreational or wanting to be competitive, you have to worry about your health, because you should play the long game. You could try to get to a PR very fast, right? So, I've worked with coaches in different ways, and I tend to want to go that route a little bit, or tend to want to put on more weight on the bar every single week. And you actually don't have to do much. If you kind of think about it in terms of just slow progression, and I want to point this out, like that's why me and Dr. G were laughing at the guy doing the 1 rep and thinking that he could do it again, because his body couldn't do it. He doesn't have the movement efficiency to do the one rep. It's not going to change in 5 minutes. And if you tried your hardest and you couldn't do it, then even your hardest motor neurons are now exhausted. So what he should do is, and what we did do is, I got him to lower the weight about 10 or 20 pounds. And I said, hey, you're doing that better. You're doing better form, better technique. And over time, you just make that line of force stronger, but only to the weight you can do. And currently with Curtis, he'll, even if you ever go back to the episode I had with him, he believes that it should be easy. I have been probably, I want to say 20%, at least 20% lighter than all my lifts than where I was doing my own prescription. And it's slower, but it's safer, and you do the movement better because it's it's still intense. It's still a heavy fucking weight. I still have to mentally prep myself, but it's not upwards to the 90 to 100%. And so if you can imagine too, over a long period of time, how you could put on weight, if you stick to the right intensity and rep ranges, track your weight. Imagine on your bench press, you gradually put on 5 pounds, what I typically encourage people is to rep cycle. So let's say one week you're going 5 to 6, and then you're going 4 to 5, and then 3 to 5, and then 3 to 2, and then you repeat that. You go back to the other weight. The next month, you're back to, 5 to 6. And then all of those weights, though, maybe you put on 2.5 to 5 pounds. And then the next month you do that again, 2.5 to 5 pounds. You're sticking those rep range. Put that to scale over 10 months. If you were to do 5 pounds, which would be incredible on your bench press, that's 50 pounds on your bench press in under a year. So if you play the long game, not only are you going to be able to blow by your PRs, but you'll also very likely be able to do it without getting hurt. And that was something I said in the episode, is just remember that all athletics are about pushing yourself as hard as you can with your skill and not breaking. And, it's the body's going to want to break down. It's like, who can push it the best and the hardest and not break? I still remember a quote from Ovechkin, despite how hard he plays. And he was just learning English at the time. And he says, Russian machine, no break. And it's really a huge part of what makes him who he is, and being able to put in the reps and put in the work. So if you're really into strength, see it as a long game, seeing it as, I'm going to do this for many, many years so I can continue to grow that skill. And be patient with it. I highly recommend, whether it's me or another coach, or even just buying a program online. Best one that you could look on, which I'm pretty sure you can get free downloads of it, is the 531 from Jim Wedler. There's many variations of it, but it's the perfect beginner program for powerlifting because it shows you percentages, it shows you how to deload, it shows you some simple accessories, and then you just repeat that, and you will get substantial gains. So I hope that gives you some good guidance on your lifting. I hope some of those tips that we had shared really help give you better perspective on the care that needs to go into this sport, because it is a fun sport. It's awesome that you get to lift the heaviest weight that humans can lift, but it has to be done with care. It has to be done methodically, and it has to be done appropriately so that you can prevent injuries, but you can still move forward. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you as a listener. And if you do me a huge solid, I would love a review on iTunes, Spotify, or on YouTube, just to help me grow this podcast, help more people like you, because I truly do want to help people chase things that they're going after. Want you to be able to go after your own ambitions. That's what life's all about. It's not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather it's the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.